Medicine and Morals. That's the name of this class. We haven't been around for a while, so I want to welcome everybody back from the spring, and those who are new here to JLI. Just to give you an overview of what we do here, is we have a series of 3 lectures throughout the year. One in the fall, which is this one. We have one in this winter and one in the spring. This year we're going to be doing morals, medicine and morals, and then in the winter we're going to do it towards a meaningful life, and then there will be some other course down the line in May. I'm sure they're going to come up with one. I have to be honest with you, I feel a little intimidated this evening, because usually when we deal with the materials of the JLI, I feel that I probably know more than most people in the class. But I have to be honest with you, tonight this may not be the case. We're dealing with issues of medicine, fortunately, we have a number of medical doctors here in the room this evening, which puts me at a slight disadvantage when it comes to the actual diagnosis and all of that. But we're not going to do that, thank God. We're not going to have anybody here get up there and play the role of a sick person. But nonetheless, I just want to warn you out front that I'm acting more as a facilitator here than anything else. You'll see in the book, for those who have the book and those who will have it next week, that we're going to be dealing with some very, very, very serious issues, such as the idea of transplants within Jewish law, risky treatments, reproductive technologies, new reproductive technologies, ethical treatments of the mentally disabled, and then finally the last one is going to be genetics and the ethics of patient confidentiality. So there's a lot of very heavy topics that we're going to be dealing with over the next 6 weeks. This is not an end-all course. What I mean by that is that at the end of this course, neither are you going to be proficient enough to be a medical doctor, nor are you going to be proficient enough to be a rabbi to make decisions for a medical doctor when it comes to matters of Jewish law. But at least we're going to have 6 weeks of together study where we're going to be able to talk about all of these issues and delve a little bit into the idea of how Judaism looks at these medical issues through a moral and ethical vantage point. Now, with that said, tonight's class is about choosing life. I'm going to start off with a class about just basically choosing life. The obligation of seeking healing. Now, to us, it may be a no-brainer. What do you mean, Rabbi? There's an actual option to that? There's something that we can do that we don't have to? We're not obliged to seek help? Well, yes, it is a possibility. And at the beginning of the class, we will probably start off with a strong case against going to doctors from a Jewish theological perspective. And then we're going to see that in the middle, somewhere down the line, Judaism took a radical change towards how they looked at doctors and medicine in general, and our obligation to seek help whenever needed. So while a central pillar of medical ethics is the principle of patient autonomy, we're going to see that plays a huge part in tonight's class. The idea that a patient has to and has a right to make their own decisions. That means, you're going to see in the secular courts, this is probably the pillar of all pillars. That in America, who gets to decide? It's the patient themselves. It's no guarantee that people are going to make the right decision. We're going to see a variety of cases, and people may make the wrong decisions. So if it's human to have the right to make decisions, it's ethical to make the right decisions. So that's what we're going to be dealing with. And Judaism has a very active say in how best to exercise your freedom when you make these decisions. God in the Torah tells us that I set before you life and death, and He urges us to choose life. Now, in and of itself, that verse would not be sufficient to tell us, okay, we're going to choose life, but why should we seek medical help when we're ill? That itself is not going to be enough. But that's going to be the starting point, and that's going to be the driving point home of how Judaism looks at all of these issues. So in a free society that we have here, it's up to us how we're going to grapple with these medical issues and how we're going to choose life. Judaism has been around for 3,300 years. I mean, it's a very old religion, has ancient roots. And it also has a legal system that's built around it. The legal system in and of itself has an opinion. There's a seat over here, or there's a seat right there next to Rosalie. Has an opinion about almost everything. Why? Because built into the system is the idea of innovation. So, while we are rooted 3,300 years ago, we're not stuck 3,300 years ago. That means we have come into the modern age, and Judaism has a system that allows for itself to take advantage of all modern technology. As long, and this is the kicker, as long as it's rooted within our traditional system. So, when we have issues of medical ethics that are come up, and of course, can you compare today to 3,300 years ago? I mean, you can't even compare today to 5 years ago. You can't even compare today to 2 years ago. It's an impossibility to do it. I mean, what we're doing today, I'd say we, the collective we, what medicine is doing today is so cutting edge, and every day there's something different going on. Every day new issues arise for ethicists and moralists. And that's why in many hospitals, what do you have? A team of people that make up an ethical committee. They make up this committee, and then their job is to sit down and think about all of these issues. So Judaism definitely has a say. And within this course, we're going to deal with 5 central objectives. 5 objectives. Number 1 is to become familiar with some key principles that guide modern Jewish medical ethics. Looking at the Torah, the Talmud, some of the Jewish texts, we will be able to identify some basic rules and how they can be applied to a range of situations. Because we're going to deal with a number of different cases. To demonstrate, number 2, that Torah speaks to real world concerns. Because there are people that will argue that, look, if you look at the Torah, we have nice stories, a little book, some stories that are good for the grandmothers, Abraham and this, he sits there with the angels. It doesn't really deal in American real life issues. It's not so. We're going to see that the Torah deals in real life issues that are adaptable to almost every situation. To understand how seemingly new problems can be solved by seeking analogs and precedents from earlier halachic texts. Precedent plays a big role. So what do you say? Well, look, Rabbi Feinstein, we're going to mention him a lot. He was probably the greatest decisor of Jewish law that in our generation. He's been dead 20 years. So what are you going, 20 years ago, what Moshe said that's going to apply today? We're going to see how that happens. By setting precedent of 20 years, 200 years, 2,000 years, we'll be able to glean out and deal with questions that are novel, new, and are always shifting. To gain an appreciation for the logical and compassion embedded in the core principles governing Jewish medical ethics. This is not only a case that people are just going to sit by your side, but within the rules that we've established, that Judaism has established, there's a compassion there, there's a morality, there's a humanism element. It's not just, cut and dry science. To be better equipped here to seek rabbinic counsel in medical cases that require the input of Jewish law. Because probably, I would say the vast majority, if you're not medical doctors here in this room, you probably don't know that there are issues that you have to turn to a rabbi to help you, to guide you through these medical issues. Because most of us are trained early on that whatever the doctor says, and that's the way it is. But there are sometimes going to conflict between what the doctor is going to tell you and what your rabbi is going to tell you. So we're going to try to figure out over 6 weeks when to ask the question. Not every time you go for a checkup, you have to call your rabbi. Rabbi, I'm going for a checkup today. What should I do? The doctor wants me to take off my pants. My answer to you is take off your pants. All right? You don't need to call me every time you're going to go see the doctor. If you schedule a colonoscopy, I'm sorry, but you're going for the colonoscopy. All right, that's the one that happened to me. I lived through it, barely, but I'm here to tell you that it could happen. Okay, you could live through it. That's not the issues that we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with some very, very, serious end-of-life issues, complex medical issues that you may turn to your rabbi. Now, and again, here's the caveat. Not every rabbi is equipped to answer these questions. They're just not. This is a very specialized field within Judaism, is medical ethics. There's maybe a few dozen rabbis who you would want to rely on. Now, what your local rabbi could do is he could direct you to the right, moving up the chain to the right rabbi that would listen to your case and give you some kind of a roadmap of how to turn, and deal with your specific situation. Just like you have to understand that not everybody here is going to be equipped to diagnose a medical situation. Are we? No. Unless you've got that MD degree, unless you're a doctor, you can do it. We can't. Same thing is true in the rabbinate. Unless you're dealing with this cutting edge issues that you understand what it means, what a heart transplant is, what death means, when does death begin, when all of these issues come about, you're not equipped to answer these questions. This is also not, I don't want this to turn into a personal case class, meaning that we're going to go through some things here and you're going to think to yourself, oh my gosh, you know what? I've experienced this and I did something wrong and I went against halacha, I went against Judaism. I'm not a father confessor and we're not really care about what you did in the past. And if there's issues here that are personal, because there may be issues that are personal and you feel that, running through the class that you may want to skip a class because it's too close to home, you may want to do that as well, It tells you before that you should ask people to start telling you cases, but I think I'm just going to skip that. I'm not really, it's going to take too long for everybody to start getting up here and start talking about their own cases of what they dealt with their parents, grandparents, whatever it is. So we're just going to skip that. We're going to get right to the class. Let's get right down. Let me start off, as I mentioned before, by making a case against doctors. We in Judaism should not go to doctors. It would be sad if that would be true, because it would knock out a whole genre of Jewish humor. All the Jewish doctor jokes that we have. How many books that we have of Jewish doctor jokes and mothers proud of their sons being doctors. That would be the biggest tragedy of all if we didn't go to doctors. Why should we not go to doctors? Why? Because if you think about it, if within Judaism we believe that God created the world, that Genesis 1:1 is true. He created the world and created everything in the world and put everything that is needed within the world. Everything. Plants, food, the sun, the stars, everything that's needed to sustain humanity was created the first 6 days. And that everything that happens post-creation is divine providence. And if it's divine providence that someone gets sick, so be it. And that's the way it is. God preordained it. God executed it. You are the recipient of it. So shall it be. And human beings, and especially Jews who believe that God in heaven controls everything. It's not only that God in heaven controls, parts of within Judaism, whatever, but he controls everything, then there's absolutely no reason to go to a doctor. This is a sign from God that this is supposed to happen, this is what's going to be, and so be it. That's the way it is. What are some of the advantages of taking this route? Number one is we would get away from the whole idea of the theodicy problem. Now we walk around, why is there illness in the world? Someone gets sick, we drive ourselves crazy. Why me, God? We wouldn't have that anymore. There's no question of why you. Illness is a blessing. Why is illness a blessing? Because God sent you this illness as a sign, as a not a warning, but as a sign that your time is coming up. Thank you very much. Get your house in order and have a good day. That's it. So instead of looking at illness or death in a negative light, we would look at illness in a positive light. Someone gets sick, No, we may be sad because if the person's a younger person, but it's not that death is the end all. This is the way God wants to create the world, and we're happy to have you around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 120 years, but this is the way it was. And if early on we would have established our thinking and our theology to work this way, we wouldn't look at sickness as a death as a negative. We would say, hey, listen, thank you for coming around, and that would be it. So there wouldn't be this problem. Why is this evil? It's not evil. Sometimes you get a letter from the bank that you may be in arrears with your mortgage. I don't know if anybody's ever gotten that. I haven't, but maybe somebody here in the room has gotten that. Is that a bad thing? No, that's just telling you, hey, you got to get your house in order before we come take your house. It's a positive thing. It's a wonderful thing. Right? The IRS sends you a letter, you owe us money. It's a wonderful thing. I dance and sing every time I get a letter from the IRS warning me that, you better put your house in order before we come and get you. So in those kind of circumstances, illness and death would not be looked at a negative thing. It would be looked at, this is c'est la vie, right? This is the way it is. Now you may say, Rabbi, come on. From Judaism's point of view, we could even think about that. Well, now let me tell you something. It's not that far off, because if you look at the last section in Genesis, now let me just read it to you if you don't trust me. I know by now there's a few skeptics here in the crowd, right? A few Spinozas that we have here with us tonight that don't believe anything. So let me just read from Vayechi, okay? Which is the last section. This is where Joseph and Jacob are already all living in Egypt. They're having a hunky-dory time. You know what? They found a brother. He's not a chief Pumbaa. He's taking care of everybody. His father sets his father up in this huge mansion. Everything is looking great. Okay? So it says there in chapter 48, verse number 1, and I read, "And it came to pass after these things that someone said to Joseph, Behold, your father is ill. So he took his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, with him." Okay, so now we know that Jacob is ill. Fine, great, huh? Okay, so why is the Torah telling us that he's ill? So if you look and do a little research into the oral commentary in the Tractate of Baba Metzia, it'll tell you that until Jacob there was no illness. There was absolutely no illness. People just died. They said goodbye, see you later, gone, have a good day. That's it, no illness. So Jacob prayed and he instituted illness. So Rashi comments, why did he institute illness? For what I said. He instituted illness so you get your house in order, which is exactly what he was doing. He called Joseph down, he blessed Joseph, he wanted him to bury him in Israel, he took care of business. Now, do we look at illness in Jacob's case as something that's sad? Oh, wow. Jacob got sick. What a tragedy. This is unfair. Think of Jacob. Okay, he's 147 now probably. Okay, but still, come on. Why him? Everybody else is healthy, walking around Egypt, and poor old Jacob gets ill. No, we don't look at it that way. In the Torah, we look at it great. He's sick, he's old, he's going to pass away soon, so he's taking care of business. So why couldn't we just follow that route? Why didn't we follow that route? Jacob prayed for illness. He prayed for illness not in order to be sad, but in order for us to, take care of what we need to take care of, and that would have been it. Finished. So it's not that outlandish that we think that Judaism early on in its stages would have said, a doctor? And you tell Joseph, would have said to him, Dad, why don't we get the best doctors in Egypt to come around? And what would Jacob have answered? Oh, who needs a doctor? What do you need a doctor for? The whole reason I asked to be sick is I want to take care of business, and let's move on. Come on, let's get on with the show. Stop the namby-pamby business, Joseph. It's time for business here. Right? And if Judaism had taken that tract, we'd be Christian Science. We wouldn't go to doctors. We'd say, why? Why do we need to go to doctors for? Everything is from heaven. Jacob prayed for us to be sick. It's a blessing that we get sick. Now I know that whatever I have left, I'm going to take care of business. Thank you very much. Don't be sad for me. I've lived, and move on. As a matter of fact, this probably was the idea for many generations within Judaism. If you take a look in the book, and there are also in the handouts, and handouts is not going to be as I think there's some here. Marvin, could you do me a favor, please, Marvin? Hate to make you work. I know you're part of the union, but could you give Efrat one and give to Devorah one on table number 2? Okay. I'm going to skip around here. Okay. I want you to go to page 14 in your book. Turn to 14. I want to bounce around a little bit. Okay. So we're talking about now. We're making the case for not seeking medical help. So if you look at page 14 in your book, and in the handouts, it's the very next page, the first page of the handouts, but in the book it's page 14. Text number 2C. Okay, text number 2C. Oh, page 5 in this. I'm sorry, I'm page 14. I'm sorry. It's confusing. Teachers page 14, student handbook page 5. Okay? You see 2C? What does it say there? Page 5, 2C. I know it's not that difficult. Come on, people. You can probably get there before. Page 5. Arnold, do you have it? Yeah. Is it a text 2C on page 5? Yeah. Okay, what does it say there? Vayechala osa b'shna shloishin v'teisha l'malchusay beraglov ad l'mayla cholyoy v'gam b'cholyoy loidoras Hashem ki beroifim. And what does it say? And Asa suffered from a foot ailment. Who was Asa? King of Judah. He suffered from a foot ailment in the 39th year of his reign until his ailment spread upward. And even in his illness, he did not seek the Lord, but the physicians. And the Torah is angry. The Torah is not happy that he did this. Right? Why? We'll get to that in a little while. But we see here that at least in the Second Temple era, right, when the king was ill and he turned to, what do they call, Raphim, the physicians. Now, even though probably in that time, Rapha probably was not a physician with a shingle and an MD degree. If you look at commentary, probably they were magicians or some other type of, charlatans. But at least in the text, Raphim would be, a Rofa would be a, what? A healer, a doctor, right? So he went to the doctors to seek medical help, and the Torah didn't like it. So we see from here that what? That at least in that era, they agreed with me. What are you going to doctors for? You're the king. You should pray to God. Look to the Lord for healing. Don't go to the doctors. Okay? But that's not what Judaism is all about. We know that Judaism is based upon a very fundamental idea of chai bahem, that you need to live with the commandments and not die with the commandments. Meaning that if you're starving on Yom Kippur, and I'm really hungry, and I'm saying, I'm going to pass out, what do? You eat. Of course, you eat, even though breaking the fast on Yom Kippur is a very serious offense. But v'chai bahem, you should live with the mitzvahs and not die by the mitzvahs, has been a fundamental principle within Judaism, and we know that. So, as much as we want to argue that initially Judaism may have been structured that Hakol b'dei Shamayim, that everything is from the hands of heaven, and if you get something and it's a present to you, congratulations, you got it, and therefore what do you need to do if you get sick? Either accept it or pray to God for healing. It's changed. Now, don't be so shocked that I might tell you attitudes in Judaism have changed over the years. It's happened to a number of different issues that we've changed. Take, for example, prophecy. Right? Someone comes around at the end of the Second Temple era, around the year, let's pick 30, okay? And proclaims that he's a prophet, okay? What does Judaism say about that prophecy? What does it say? True or false? False. We give him a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Forget about whoever it is. We're not picking on anybody personally here, right? But anybody would come around in the year 30, he'd say, I had a revelation from God. This is what God wants me to do as a prophet. What do we say? Down. Why? If you look at it, prophecy is a fundamental principle within Judaism. Maimonides writes that in his 13 Principles of Faith, that we believe in prophecy. And we believe, was Moses a prophet? Right? Was Joshua a prophet? Was Samuel a prophet? David and Solomon and Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and so on and so forth, real prophets, meaning that they got their direction directly from God, right? And we believe them. Our whole religion is based upon the prophecies of the Torah, right? Yet, several centuries later, if someone comes along and says, I'm in the spirit of the prophetic visions of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, what will we say to that person? No, prophecy has ended. So issues of matters of theology and religions and attitudes of traditions over time do change. Situations change. So it may have been possible that our attitude early in the development of Judaism would have been, doctors no, God yes. Now it's both yes. I shouldn't say God no, but certainly it's changed where now it becomes not only doctors yes, but absolutely yes. And of course, right? You have a hangnail, you go to a doctor, everything is a doctor now, within Judaism. So much so that Maimonides, and that will be our first reading before we actually get into the text. Maimonides has a reading. If you don't mind, turn to page 4. That's text number 1. Page 4. No. In the handouts, it's. I don't know where the handouts is. You're just going to have to follow along somewhere.
Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Akiva.
No. I don't know if I copied this. For the those who have the handouts, I don't think they're in the handouts. But it says like this. Maimonides writes, similarly, it is a positive mitzvah to remove any obstacle that could pose a danger to life and to be very careful regarding these matters. As it states, be cautious and guard your life. So Maimonides writes it's a mitzvah to guard your life. Okay? No question about it. And to do everything a way that could pose a danger to it. And he quotes from Deuteronomy, be cautious and guard your life. So from here we want to glean that Maimonides, who lived when? Anybody know? In the 1200s, right? In the 1200s, the 13th century, Maimonides was the major codifier of Jewish law. At that point already had argued, well, what's he going to argue? No doctors. I mean, that wouldn't be very smart of him, would it be? Of Maimonides. Since he made his living as a physician. Thank you very much. So obviously, Maimonides would have been very, very pro-physician. He writes, he codifies that it's a mitzvah to take care of yourself. Now, in and of itself, that would mean nothing as far as going to a doctor is concerned. From here you see nothing that Maimonides is pushing you towards a doctor, telling you should go to a doctor. All he's saying to you is don't eat gribbinus. Right? Gribbinus are bad for you, so once a year maybe, but more than once a year, forget about it. Kishka, only on leap years. All right? And then everything else that tastes good, that is fried, even if you have things that start off well. I love Kaiser's commercials. Kaiser's, who I'm proud, a living example of how good they take care of your health. Things. Their commercials is with the they have the, what's that bar? The granola bar, which started out well, but then of course someone decided to dip it into chocolate, wrap it around with some candies and do this and that. So so probably Maimonides would say such a granola bar dipped in chocolate with candies and everything else around it and caramel and all that, not so much. Not so much. Go easy on that, right? But from here, from Maimonides itself, we would have a difficult time extrapolating that to say that you should go to a doctor. But at least we know that a Jew from the times of the Middle Ages had to take care of themselves. That their body was a temple. And if our body is a temple, you have to take care of that temple. Okay? So here we have two issues. Number one is, do we go to doctors? Today, yes, we do go to doctors according to Maimonides. And how far do we push that? How far are we going to take that obligation to go to a doctor? What if we are in a state where we don't want to go? We're tired. We're exhausted. You know what? God forbid, lo yaleinu, there are diseases that ravage you. That just ravage you. And you're at the point that, the doctors have told you, look, there's one experimental possibility. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be painful, but it may extend your life a couple of months. You're miserable as is. What do? Do you have to? Do you go? Do you have to go? What is the obligation? Your family is begging you. They want you around another month. Would be worth it for them, but you're exhausted. You're finished. You're done. You think of quality of life. You can't take it anymore. So how far does this obligation go to a doctor extend to? Can the patient, and here's really the crux of tonight's discussion, so it's a long-winded introduction, is autonomy versus coercion. That means that, hey, I don't want him. I'm done. What? How could you be done? We have medicine for that today. Yes, there's a proven record. We can help you. So what does the Torah say? On one hand, the patient says, I don't want to. On the other hand, the Torah has urged us, you've heard from Maimonides, to tell you that you have to take care of yourself. You've got to do whatever you can. What happens if these two issues collide in a cataclysmic event? And that's the first test case that we're going to be reading today. If you go back to page 2, it's about a teenage girl. Okay? At an age when most teenage girls are thinking about having fun, Hannah Jones is hoping only to be allowed to die with dignity. Hannah, who is 13 and terminally ill, has persuaded a hospital to withdraw a high court action that would have her forced to have a risky heart transplant against her will. Instead, Hannah said she would prefer to spend her remaining days in the care of her family, rather than take the chance of dying in the hospital. Her mother, Kirsty, an intensive care nurse, and her father, Andrew, an auditor, say they respect their daughter's wishes. Hannah has been in and out of the hospital since having leukemia diagnosed at the age of 5. The chemotherapy left her with a hole in her heart, and as her body has grown, her heart has been unable to keep pace. It has only 10% of normal function, and she quickly gets short of breath. Doctors have warned Hannah that a transplant is her only hope of long-term survival. However, doctors have also warned her that a heart transplant is risky, especially due to her weakened condition. I know there's a big waiting list for heart transplants, and I'm happy to save someone else's life, she said. I've decided that there are too many risks, and even if I took it, there might be a bad outcome afterwards. I've been in the hospital too much, and I've associated hospital with bad memories. So that's why I didn't want the transplant. There's a chance that I may be okay, and there's a chance that I may not be as well as I could be, but I'm taking that chance. Okay. This was a case that was brought up to the High Court in England. The High Court ruled that she can do it. They ruled for her in favor of Hannah, and she decided not to have the heart transplant. So what's so strange about this case? Why bring up this case?
She's 13 years
Thank you very much. That's exactly right. There's nothing unreasonable about this case. We have this case, every day in America, thousands and thousands of times. Patients, sit down with their physicians and they decide, look, it's just not worth it. I've lived a good life. I'm willing to face whatever comes my way and have a good day. That would be as we call no chiddush. That would be no news. What's news here is the court decided that they would allow a 13-year-old girl to make her own decision. That is the news of this story. That's the news of the story. And now, to extrapolate, we have to now take this story of Hannah and now translate it into what would be within Judaism. Here's a case of a Jewish girl. She's 13 years old. The doctors tell her that, the only way that she's going to live is through a heart transplant. She decides, no. What do we do? What do we do? All right, so we're going to get to it. Don't answer this question right now. Okay, the key question has already been answered. The key question has been answered. That here, the chiddush, the unbelievable idea of what the court's allowed is to listen to a relative minor. A minor. The court said the minor could make their own decisions. Now we're going to see within Judaism if that holds up to be true as well. All right? So just keep that case study in mind as we go through several things here. Now, the first thing is that we have to establish, and we did for a little bit, is the obligation of going and seeking healing. Okay? We talked about not doing it, and that took place for many years. But today, we do have. But how do we know that we need to do that? So, let's first start off with a couple of verses that are not favorable to doctors, that would be anti-seeking thing, and that would be on page number 4, text 2a. Ani Hashem Reifecha, I am your Lord, your healer. Those who have the handouts don't have this. I thought everybody would have the handouts. Hashkacha Proteus. The books came literally an hour before I left. I thought they weren't going to be on time, but thank you, Rabbi Shalom, for at least getting the books to the people. So the handouts have bits and pieces here and there, but just it's an easy verse. I am Hashem, your healer. Tells us that what? What will we argue? Against doctors. Who needs doctors, right? I am God, your healer. You have a problem, what do? That's it. Pray to God, finish. It doesn't work. God could say yes, God could say no. There's verse. Here it goes even further. He says, see now that it is I am the one and there is no God like me. I cause death and grant life. I strike and I heal. Okay? And no one can rescue from my hand. Here he clearly says, I am chief doctor. Not only am I the creator of the world, I put illness into the world and I heal illness. So again, if God is going to heal illness, what don't we need? Doctors. Thank you very much. So here you have case number 2. Clearly from the Torah's point of view, we don't need. If it's Hashkacha Proteus, it's divine providence, it's out. Asa, we had mentioned him before, King Asa, Hashem was not happy with him, the Torah was not happy with him, seeking refuge within the arms of physicians. They expected better of a king, that he should have put his total faith in God above. So if we had ended this class right now, then there's no problem. We go home, tear up our cards, our health cards, say whatever comes our way. That's it. You have to live healthy. Rambam says you got to live healthy, but if something goes wrong, Hashem is always going to be there to take care of you. But that's not what Judaism is all about. Judaism has grown from not only a biblical text religion into a whole corpus of oral tradition, right? The Talmud. And this plays a major factor in what we're going to be dealing with tonight. Because here's an interesting case. This is a case of violence perpetrated by one fellow against another fellow. Okay? Is it? 2 fellows are quarreling. Page 6. If men quarrel and one strikes the other with a stone or with a fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, if he gets up and walks about outside on his staff, the assailant shall be cleared. Meaning, thank God we don't kill the one that perpetrated the beating. He's cleared. He shall only pay for the victim's idleness, and he shall provide for his cure. He shall provide for his cure. Verappa yerape. He shall provide for his cure. Now what does that tell us? That he has to, whatever curing this guy needs, he has to get, right? He has to go out there and get. So now we're going to look at the text of the Talmud, that we do have in the handouts on the next page, 3/4 of the way down, almost the last part of the first paragraph. But if you're looking at the book itself, page 6, it says, the school of Yishmael taught, he shall provide for his cure. For this verse we learn that permission is granted to physicians to heal. Verappa yerape, that he shall provide for his cure. According to the words of Rabbi Yishmael, this has been granted for physicians to go ahead and heal. That means there are people who can study medicine and heal people. Really? Okay. So here we have the first idea within the text of the corpus of the Talmud, that there is an obligation for Jews, even though we don't see that explicitly from the verse, but since we said physicians can cure, what is then the flip side of the matter? That people need to go to physicians. If a physician can cure, then we need to go to physicians. There's an obligation to extend. And then Rashi adds, and we do not say, God has struck, will the physician then go and heal? Right? We don't say that. Like laughing, God beat this guy up, right? Well, then they're going to run to a doctor. No, go to a doctor. You have to go to a doctor. Except what's the problem here? Come on. Some Talmudic mind. You're thinking Talmudic wise. What do we see here? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brian. God did not do this. This is not eternal illness. Who did this? Some other guy. Sure, if some other guy beats you up, then go to a physician. You're right. Okay, that makes sense. You have external wounds, broken leg, a broken this, someone did it to you, a ox gored you, whatever should be the case. Yes, makes sense. Hashem wants you to go to a physician because it was perpetrated upon you by another human being. But where do we see that if someone gets ill, internal illness, something that God placed upon you, how would we know? How do we know that we have to go to a doctor from this case? So far we only have two things that we know. Number one is that the guy who perpetrated, the assailant, has to pay for the doctor. And this itself is a major issue. Right? Because in reality, there was a great argument that doctors should not get paid. That was placed upon us by the Democrats. No. Scratch that from the thing. Scratch it. I'm joking. There's no politics here. I'm saying that issue, whether doctors should get paid or not, was in and of itself a great argument within the Gemara. Why? Because a person cannot get paid for doing a mitzvah. You can't pay a person for doing a mitzvah. So someone teaching Torah cannot get paid for it. We know that. Obviously. Yeah. Okay, we know that to be the case. That's for sure in this congregation, that no one pays for that. But even more so, if it's v'rapa yerapeh, if the doctor has a responsibility to cure, and Hashem gave him that means when he's curing, what's he doing? God's a mitzvah, so he shouldn't get paid for it. So there was argument, goes back and forth. At the end, they agree a doctor should get paid. But he should get paid like anybody else that does a mitzvah. Why do you pay someone? Because it's called schar batola. Instead of teaching you Torah, I could be out making a living. So therefore, since time you took me away from that, so you compensate me for that. The same thing is true about a doctor. Since he could be out there doing something else, he could be plowing a field, selling diamonds, doing other stuff. Great. Since he's there healing you, you pay him. All right? You pay him. Over the years, that compensation has... Well, people, if people would appreciate Torah study as much as they would appreciate health, who would be rich? I'll leave it up to you. So here you have within this verse, v'rapa yerapeh, we've learned two things. Number one, a physician has a right to heal. Number two, that if a person gets bodily injured, there's harm to the person, he has to go to the doctor. Where do we see within the verse itself that if God gives you an illness, that you have to go? That's left to Rashi's grandson. Rashi was a brilliant scholar in and of himself. I mean, if you look at Rashi, the commentary he wrote on the Chumash, the commentary he wrote on the Gemara, but as great as he was, he put together a family of superstars. It would be hard to match within Jewish history such a family like Rashi had. He had grandsons that would come and argue with him. Could you imagine with their Zayde, Rashi? And not only argument, if you ever learned Tosfos, if you ever did intensive studies, within the Torah, Talmud scholarship, they don't write very nice about him. Sometimes they write, he made this, and it's not so kind sometimes. So Tosfos, the commentary within Rashi, he adds one little piece. Now you have to understand that the Torah is written very, very precisely. Every word, every nuance, every letter can be built upon. We could build the Empire State Building on an extra vav. Literally. I'm talking about really literally. You could build Empire State Building on a vav. If you put a vav there, you can actually build Empire. What? Mountains hanging, but I'm telling you what you could do there. So, what's the problem here in the verse? Not the problem, but the verse is written, v'rapoi yerapeh, and the healer shall heal. Right, v'rapa yerapeh, why twice? Could say once v'rapa, and he should heal them. What do you mean v'rapa yerapeh? The extra word, there must be something within there. So what does Tosfos say? From the word v'rapa, you can follow along, page 7. Page 7, for the book and for the word verape alone, we can derive that as permission to heal. What then is the purpose of the double expression verape yerape? Without it, one might think that only wounds inflicted by humans may be healed. Whereas healing an illness that is divinely inflicted could be constructed as defying the edict of God. Therefore, the word is repeated to teach us that it is permitted to heal all illnesses. All illnesses. From the extra verape. So we have two types of illnesses. One that's inflicted by human beings, the other one that's inflicted by God, and both of them you have a right to heal. Whatever we're talking about now is anyways, it's academic, right? We're only trying to build a case because we know we go to doctors. We know we go to doctors, but I just want to, as we're getting closer and closer to the issue of dealing with the test case, here is in our minds where it changed. And it seemed that in Talmudic times, our view generally of the world changed. Our view of body and health, vis-a-vis 1,000 years before that, probably changed. And we see it in a very interesting story of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. This is not just a story, but it's an apocryphal story. It's a very interesting story. And everybody has that. Right? The handouts have it, I think on page 3, and we have it on page number 8, text 4a. Listen to this story. Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva were once walking through the streets of Jerusalem, accompanied by another person. They encountered a sick man. They don't tell us anything about the sick man. They don't tell us how sick he was. They don't tell us even what religion he was. He said to them, "Rabbi, tell me how I can be cured." They replied to him, "Do such and such until you are cured." So Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel, not only were they great scholars, they were also physicians, obviously, right? Okay, they just gave this guy medical advice. Do thus and thus and you will be cured. He asked them, "Who afflicted me?" They replied, "God." The sick man responded, "You have interfered in an area that is not your domain. God afflicted me and you advised me how to be cured. Are you not defying God's will?" Now, understand this. We don't know anything about this man. We know nothing about this person, right? We all know that he just bumped into Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. He asked them all this, and now he's challenging them. By this challenge, we can infer, number one, he may not have been Jewish. Because this obviously was not a Jewish ideology. Why we're interfering. If Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva are giving the advice, obviously, so this must have been a man outside of Judaism, right? Who's asking this question. So there were, at that time, at the destruction of the Second Temple or post-Second Temple era, that there were people that believed in what we talked about back in the beginning of time, right? That you cannot interfere with God's workings in the world. Who that was or what that was, we don't know. But that would have been more, if you would have interviewed both of these people, who was more honest towards biblical view of illness and health, the sick man or the rabbis? The sick man, right? The sick man would have been more. You would have interviewed and you would say the sick man is more in line or more honest than Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel. They are the ones that have changed it. The sick man responded, interfered. The rabbis asked him, "What is your occupation?" He replied, "I'm a farmer. This is my scythe in my hands." They asked him, "Who created the vineyard?" He answered, "God." They said to him, "You interfere in an area not under your domain. God created it and you are cutting its fruits." Now see what's going on over here, okay? So now what they're doing is they're deriving their ideology from nature, from natural order of things, right? God created the earth, right? Everything within it, yet you would not argue that, hey, we should do nothing, right? We should only eat what's available outside, right? Everybody would agree that farming is a proper thing to do. It's not against God's wishes, right? Because why? Why? Because God built within the system the whole idea of farming, right? He wanted it. What did he tell Adam when he kicked him out of the Garden of Eden? Tend to the garden, right? Here is the earth. La'avda l'shamra, I want you to go out and work it. And what did he say to him when he punished him? Kites v'dardim, right? You're going to eat thistles and thorns and all of these things you're going to plant. So what did God say to Adam? That what do you do in the world? Part of the natural order of things is Farming is a natural order of how you live, right? So they're arguing back to this person, right? That you would not say we're interfering with God's plan if you do something outside of that. He responded, do you not see the scythe in my hand? If I did not plow, trim, fertilize, and weed, nothing would grow. Of course you have to. So what do you expect? People just to sit there and die? Obviously, it doesn't make any sense. We have to grow food in order to eat. This is not upending God's. You have to take this argument to the conclusion. This is not upending God's program. This is part of God's program. But interfering with illness is interfering with God's program. What's the difference? If you were arguing the man's side, do you see the difference between illness and farming? Is there a difference within illness and farming?
No, you don't really know God's plan. When you're talking about illness, you don't know.
Right, but if you got ill, that's God's plan.
But you don't know that. You might be. He's going to be merciful and.
Okay, but let God decide that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what the man is.
Why not do everything you can?
Oh, because if you believe that this is supposed to happen to you, right, from the man's vantage point, then it's not the same as farming, because illness is not natural. Is illness natural? Illness is not natural. It comes natural. Should be a person lives a certain age and then passes away. Illness comes in. That's something irrational, illogical, unnatural. It comes in to hurt us. Negative. All of these things. If that is so, the man says we should not interfere with that. The rabbi said to him, "Foolish man, have you never heard of this verse? As for man, his days are like grass. Just as a tree without weeding, fertilizing, and plowing would not sprout, and after sprouting without water and fertilizer would not live but will die, so too the human body." Now here, what are they using? They're using Talmudic logic, right? They're using Talmudic logic to buffer their case. The drugs and medications are like fertilizer, and the doctor is like the farmer. That's how the story ends. Now from this story, we can do the rest of the class just on this story itself, just the arguments of these two individuals. But of course, since we are the progeny of Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva, we are the descendants and we are the inheritors of that oral tradition. That's what we agree, and we've decided, you know what? That's the way it is. If we get sick, we do everything we possibly can to get healthy. Because the Torah would want us that way, and it's not, God forbid, interfering with God's will. As a matter of fact, this is God's will. Okay? This is God's will. Not to say, does God want us? Okay, really didn't want to, but if you have to, okay, do it. No. You are actually performing a mitzvah that when you get ill, go to a doctor, seek out a doctor, hire a doctor, pay a doctor, get well. This is what God wants you to do, and it's analogous to farming. Don't sit back and don't take it. Do everything you can to do that. Okay? So what's the problem with seeking medical care? So the problem was going to be that, as we discussed before, that God forbid this somehow, somewhere, somehow disrupts God's plan. So on one hand, what people tend to do, and especially here in America, is go to extremes. We like to take everything to the extreme. What do I mean by that? That since we allowed human beings to seek out medical care, since we allowed people to go out and seek doctors and to go to doctors, what happens now? Doctors have now been substituted for what? God, thank you very much. For God. Doctors are now substituted for God. Because now the Torah said, hey, what should I do? Seek medical care? No problem. I go out there, I seek medical care. And what do we forgot about? Who is the ultimate healer? God. Right? I mean, I know there's a number of doctors here in the room, and don't take this personal, but you know what it says in the Mishnah? Taiv sheberoifim, the best of doctors, go to Monaco. Not really. That's not what it says. Taiv sheberoifim legehenim. Right? It says, Taiv sheberoifim legehenim. Means the best of doctors don't go to Gehenim. Now, Gehenim could mean a number of different places. Some say it's a cruise, some say it's this, it's that. But most people talk about, Gehenim being purgatory. Now, why would most doctors go to purgatory? So the rabbis inferred, because doctors start to believe in themselves. They start to feel that they're the healer, and they're the ones that are actually doing all of the healing, and they forgot about the ultimate healer up in heaven. So, in that sense, but okay, fine. But that's neither here nor there. From the patient's point of view, what happens now in America? We put all of our trust in the medical system, and we forget about the spiritual side of healing. Because why? Because not only have we swung from being completely devoted to God, now we cut God out completely. But there is a whole spiritual side of us within Judaism that we neglect. That we completely neglect whatsoever. Not everybody, but I'm saying the vast majority of people completely neglect the spiritual side. I have something wrong with me, get rid of it, doctor. I don't care, it's a pain, get rid of it. You operate, schmoperate, whatever you have to do, just get rid of it. The Torah will tell us something else, I don't care. I'm putting my life in your hands, doc, do it. But there's a happy medium. It doesn't have to be exclusive. It doesn't have to be an either or. Either you trust God or you trust the doctor. Judaism has asked us that to find a happy medium where both work in tandem. Both work in tandem. The doctor understands that he's been given this privilege to heal people. And who's he been given the privilege by? Hashem. So if you read the next text about if a person is hungry and eats food in order to relieve himself from this great discomfort, will we say that he discarded his trust in God? Only fools would say such a thing. Just as I thank God when I eat for giving me something to remove my hunger and giving me life and sustenance, likewise it is proper to thank Him for creating the treatment which I can use to heal my illness. So here we see already Maimonides fusing these two ideas. The idea that v'rapa yirape, that there's nothing wrong with your physician healing you, and the second idea of thanking Hashem for giving the doctor the opportunity to be able to heal you and giving him the wisdom of trying to understand and coming up. So then we ask ourselves in the question for discussion, in light of the readings 4a and 4b, why was King Asa condemned for seeking the counsel of doctors? If we're looking now and we're talking about the greatness of how Judaism says that we have to go to doctors and we're encouraged to go to doctors and doctors have the right to heal and this is the way it's supposed to be, so why was King Asa condemned? Because what? Because he didn't thank Hashem, or what? He didn't seek Hashem's wisdom, or he made the doctors into an idol. All of these answers are absolutely correct. Just to add on a little bit, is number one, a king is different. King is different. You are the leader of the Jewish people. You have to act differently. Something happens to you, it's not as an average person. We say an average person, something happens to him, okay, fine. You know what? We'll look, we'll seek. We know that I'm sure there's a sign from God. But certainly if something happens to a king, he immediately needs to react spiritually wise. Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to me? And he didn't. See, he should have gone out there before anything else. Number two, I'll tell you what it is. Times change. Times just change. Different times need different types of situations. In the times when we are greatly spiritual, if we lived in the time of complete bliss in the Garden of Eden, would we need a doctor? No. Why would we not need a doctor? Because our relationship with God was so strong at that point. Right? Our relationship with God was so personal that everybody had this, I knew this thing, that if something happens to me, it's directly from God, and with Him only I will work. Anybody feel that way today? Anybody have this kind of relationship with God Almighty? Sit down, how are you, what's going on? I'll meet you at Starbucks at 10:30. You're buying today. We have this kind of a relationship with God that, you know what, that we know that we live in this level, in this tremendous spiritual level that, you know what, everything is in the hands of God. If we lived that way and we truly believed it, what would happen? God would reciprocate. He would say, yeah, look at them, they have complete trust in me, and therefore I have no problem. I'm going to deal with them on a personal basis. Moshe Rabbeinu, you think he would have gone to a doctor? If something would have happened to Moshe Rabbeinu, what would he have done? Come on, we all know what Moshe Rabbeinu did in the case. What happened when Miriam got sick? His sister got sick. What did Aaron tell him to do? Did he tell him to run out and seek medical advice? What did he tell him to do? Pray, right? And what did Moshe do? Kael na rafan Allah, right? He turned to God and he said, God in heaven, healer. Right? So we have, even within the Chumash itself, we have diseases that are what? Spiritual in nature. When you have mitzvah on your arm, who do you go to? Dermatologist. A dermatologist. What was that disease? Hansen's? It's not Hansen's, right? We all agree. The 10 times we've learned the parsha of Mitzayra, Tazri Mitzayra, we all agree it's not Hansen's disease, right? Who do you go to? Who establishes that it's a nega? Kohen. Why a Kohen? If you have a nega in the land, according to my monitors, what should you do? Who are you running to? Your doctor. Wait, run to a kohen. What's a kohen going to know? A kohen is sitting in your shrine. Doesn't went to medical school. He doesn't even have a degree from outside of America university, right? From Guadalajara, he doesn't even have. Even further down in Yeruchamsville, he doesn't have a degree. Forget about it, right? So he's not even an MD. He's not even a DM. He's a nothing. So why go to a kohen? Because in those days we say, what was tsaras? What was it? Tsaras was a medical condition that was purely spiritual in nature. Completely spiritual in nature. And how did he get healed? What did he do? Kicked him out. They kicked him out of the community, right? They put him outside. So go sit there for 2 weeks. Guy comes back 2 weeks completely healed. Perfectly. No ointments, no this, no lotion, no this, no this. Come back for a follow-up visit, nothing. Okay, the kohen had to come back for a follow-up visit, but not to anybody else. So in the Torah itself, it shows us that when we're dealing in this spiritual level, when tsaras is of a spiritual nature, we don't need physicians. Because God himself is the roife. God himself is the thing. And that should have been with Asa. Asa should have been at this level as king of Israel. I need a. Of course, God. Because that's what he's supposed to do. That's what you have to do. Because the Torah demanded of us, knowing that when you're this level, a doctor doesn't cut it for you. But since we are all now living in this gullus, we're all now living in exile. So in exile, God says, okay, you know what? V'rapa yirape, a person has to heal you. We don't have the kind of relationship we had back then when we were in the Garden of Eden, or that we're giving the 10 Commandments, or when there was prophecy, or when there was others issues involved. So go. But still, even in that kind of circumstances, even then, you have to remember, who's the healer? God's the healer. And how do we know this? Because 3 times a day when we say in Shmoneh Esrei, who do we ask to heal us? I actually insert my doctor's name in there. I hope you don't mind. No. But we say in the Amidah, what do we say? Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafei. Right? If you turn to page number 11. Page number 11. You don't have it in the handouts. Next week you will have it. But just follow along. This is from the Siddur. Right? Rafa'enu Hashem v'nei Rafei, heal us, O Lord, and we can be healed. Help us and we will be saved. Grant complete cure and healing to our wounds. For you, Almighty, are a faithful and merciful healer. Blessed are you, Lord, who heals the sick of his people Israel. Okay? So right there. So what are we doing? What are we doing here? Every day in Shmoneh Esrei. Now, you're going to have to admit that when you say that prayer, you mean it. See, that's a problem. Because most people give lip service in prayer. Most people are not serious. They say in Shmoneh Esrei, they're thinking about what's going on during the day. Well, what do you think about in Shmoneh Esrei? What's happening in the news, the election coming up, this, everything except Shmoneh Esrei. And we know that. We know from stories beyond. The guy who had a court case with his Gentile neighbor. So after services, he went to his rabbi and he said, "Rabbi, what do you think? In court this morning, I would argue this, he would argue that, I would argue this, he would argue that, back and forth. What do you think of this, my line of argument?" He says, "You have nothing to worry about because the Gentile doesn't daven Shmoneh Esrei. He wouldn't come up with the counter arguments. You see, only you came up with the counter arguments because you had a chance to daven Shmoneh Esrei today. So you have nothing to worry about. He doesn't daven Shmoneh Esrei, so don't bother, right?" So within Shmoneh Esrei, even though we say the words Rafa'enu, but do we mean it? See, we're talking about someone that actually believes in what he's saying. That means when the guy says Rafa'enu, he turns to the Lord. And when does this happen? When? When you need a Rafa'enu. Unfortunately, that's the reality of circumstances, and this is what we call humanity. That when do you actually start to say this with feeling? When you need it. When you need it. So when you need it, this is what we call in Hasidic terminology, Atzaras Chassid. It's called Atzaras Chassid. Everybody in the Hasidic world has a Rebbe. A Rebbe is supposed to be there when? In good times and bad times, right? When you have a good deal, you're supposed to cut the Rebbe in, right? And because the Rebbe is a Rebbe. You're supposed to go to him always. If the Rebbe says to do something, you're supposed to listen to him. When do most people go to a Rebbe? Thank you very much. When the IRS has finally showed up, then they go to the Rebbe Rafa'enu. Rebbe, get me out of this. Rebbe, help me. If you could see the letters that the Rebbe would receive, I wouldn't say the majority of letters that the Rebbe received were help me out letters, but many people turn to the Rebbe. We call this a Tzaras Chassid. We call it, when there's a tzara, I'm a chassid. When things are good, and the Rebbe then says, okay, you have to go out and put tefillin on with people, I'm not a Lubavitcher. When Rebbe says, go out into the street and ask women to light candles, I'm not a Chabadnik. But all of a sudden, something goes wrong, am I a Chabadnik? Rabbi Groner, I need to be first in line. All right, that's the way human beings are. So when we say Rafa'enu, every day in davening, if everything is going well, we say it the same way we say Slach Lanu, the same way we mean about Mashiach Tzidkenu. We say it. We give it lip service, right? But when someone really feels it, Rafa'enu is supposed to mean that Hashem Yisbarach is the true healer. That means when you say in davening, God, please help us. Please help us. Meaning that you're actually turning and your faith is in His hands. Whatever happens is in His hands. Rabbi Shalom, help us. And we believe in the Tillim. We call people to say Tillim. We're going to say Tillim for somebody. Okay, you could read the words, but it's in the gut of the pit of the stomach, is to believe that Hashem is actually up there and He's listening to your prayers. He puts aside everything else in the world and He's paying attention to you. And then not only is He going to pay attention to you, what do you want Him to do? Act. Thank you very much. You want Him to act on your prayers. You don't have to sit there and say, very nice song, very nice we got together, very nice we did all of these things. No vacancies tonight. No. You want vacancies. You want God to act upon your prayers. Right? So this is what Judaism is demanding when he says that. When we say Misha Berach, the next text is Misha Berach, may the one who blessed our patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, David, Solomon, heal. And we put into place the name of the person in the merit of the charity being given for his or her sake. In the merit, may God grant compassion to him, her, to restore him, her, to heal him, her, to strengthen him, her, to enliven him, her, shall send speedily from heaven a complete healing, him, her. A healing of the spirit, healing of the body, and let us all say, Amen, right? Because we believe that charity by itself is going to help in the person's well-being. So here we've come a little bit, we've moved back to the center. The beginning, which was complete trust in God, then we went complete trust in physicians. Now we're coming back that it's physicians and God. Tzedakah tatzil memoves. Tzedakah, it tells us charity in the Talmud saves us from death. From death? I thought that's the doctor's job to save you from death. No? No. But tzedakah tatzil memoves, the well-known story of this guy, unfortunately. In the olden days, you know how people got married? It's called a shidduch. Today also it was. We have the same thing in the Hasidic world. What's a shidduch? Parents get together, Shlomo ben Yaina goes together with Gittel Bas Tzipora, and they put them together. Like my grandparents met under the chuppah, my mother tells me. That's the first time my grandfather saw my grandmother. I don't know if that works so well these days. I wouldn't advise it for young couples. I say they should meet at least by the Tanoim. Just before the chuppah, they should get together for a few minutes. But under the chuppah, it's not too good. It's not too good. So what happens? This guy ends up with a shidduch. Okay? His father told him, Mazel Tov, we made a shidduch for you. So he goes visits his colleague, goes visits his bride in the town, next town over. This is trouble, ladies and gentlemen. This is trouble. Nothing about her he likes. Absolutely nothing. What do? She's not kind, she's not nice, she's not pretty, she's not smart, she's not good, she's nothing. I mean, this is a disaster. A total disaster. So the guy's sitting there. He doesn't know what to do. So Shabbos, he decides this is what he's going to do. He gets up in the middle of the Torah reading, and in that shul, they had on the wall a charity box. So he got up in the middle of the Torah reading in front of the entire congregation, and in the middle of the congregation was his father-in-law, his future father-in-law, and on Shabbos he ripped off the charity box from the wall and started stuffing the money in his pocket. Ooh! When his future father-in-law saw this, he began to scream, such a crazy guy, gonna marry my daughter, the shidduch is off! You understand that? The shidduch is finished. Okay? Yeah, you put that, everything calms down, the money goes back. Then Sunday he's back in town, he's sitting in yeshiva. He tells the story to his friends. He says, you don't know how close this was to disaster. And this is what I did. So the guy says to him, why did you think of this? Why did you think of ripping off the tzedakah pushka? So he says, I remember the Gemara, it says, tzedakah tatzel memovis. Charity saves one from certain death. All right? When I saw that, there's nothing to talk about. Nothing to talk about. All right? So charity saves, you never know when it comes into play. Many times, I wouldn't say exclusively, many times when one wrote into the Rebbe that he was ill or had an ill relative, the Rebbe's answer would be, check your tefillin and your mezuzahs. Check your tefillin and your mezuzahs. I'm talking about a guy with an illness. Rebbe, he would say, no, check your tefillin and your mezuzahs. Why? Because a tzaddik, someone like the Rebbe saw that in this world there's a symbiotic relationship. That this is not God creates the world and leaves it, an absentee landlord, Ozav Hashem es haaretz, that people believe, right? That God's up there, we're down here, and there's the two don't meet. But the Rabbi Shalom is an active player in this world. Things that he does we may not understand, and things that he do may feel painful to us. But irregardless, he still is involved in the day-to-day running of this world. And therefore our spiritual life is directly connected to our physical life. So when someone gets ill, the Rebbe was always a big proponent of going to a doctor, seeking a second opinion, going to Reifim Yedidim, doctors that doctors that know about Yiddishkeit. The Rebbe always pushed people towards doctors, don't get me wrong. But at the same time, one should not forget the spiritual side of his being. So you know how many stories there were of people checking their tefillin, and this was wrong, and that was wrong, and this letter was mixed in it. So the role of spiritual healing within Judaism is unbelievable. It takes a priority within Judaism. As you see on page 12, text 6a, right? You could find it in page 26 in the handouts. The handouts, page 26. The handouts. One who feels pain in the head should engage in the study of Torah. One who feels pain in the throat should engage in the study of Torah. One who feels pains in the bowels should engage in the study of Torah. One who feels pain in the bones should engage in the study of Torah. One who feels pain in all of the body should engage in the study of Torah. Can I call you back after class? Bye. All right? All of these things tell you one thing. What? It turns you towards spirituality. Why, if I have a sore throat, I should learn Torah? Take a lozenge. Get a medical advice. No, Torah tells you study Torah. Why? God was looking into the Torah as He created the world. That means in the Torah, in the world itself, God created it by the building blocks, the blueprint called the Torah. So now we have both. We have a God that put into place everything, meaning that the Torah itself is the regulator of everything. Everything is regulated by the Torah. Everything. Thus, when God wanted to create and order his universe, he peered into the Torah and created his universe. Therefore, if one has an illness of the body, meaning that he has departed from the normal order, as I mentioned before, illness is not a natural state of affairs, he should study Torah, which is the regulator of the universe. Then the person who received this illness, which is a change, will be able to return to the normal order. Now again, this should not be taken in any way, shape, or form to disregard the use of medicine. Only a chassid shoite, a foolish, pious person will do that. What the Gemara is saying, that together with medical treatment, one needs to look into themselves. Means check what's going on. I get sick, Hashem is sending me a message, not somebody else. Remember, we talked about this in a previous JLI class, that when one has to judge themselves harshly, it's only themselves, not somebody else. One should never say to another person, you know why you're ill? Because you're a shmegegi, because you don't give charity, because you don't study Torah, because you don't put on tefillin. No, you could never say that to anybody else. About yourself, you could judge harshly. You could say, you know what, I'm getting these things because I should be a better person, I should be this, I should be that, I should this. To yourself, somebody else, you're not the judge. You don't know why that person is getting anything, and you should never speculate, because speculation is no good when it comes to other people and judging them. So for yourself, something is wrong, pishpish b'masav. Check what's going on in your own life. Now that doesn't mean, again, I don't want anyone to come out of here to think that, God forbid, that because you don't put on tefillin, you get sick. There's no correlation. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that, you know what, the fact is that if you don't do mitzvahs, you're going to get sick, and if you follow mitzvahs, everything is going to be good. It doesn't work that way. No one can argue that, because in reality it doesn't work that way. What we're saying is, don't think that there is no connection between the spiritual and the physical life. That means, you know what, if God forbid you're not feeling well, is it a bad idea to start putting on tefillin, checking your tefillin, checking your mezuzahs? No. It's a good idea to do that. To claim because I didn't do it, and this is a terrible thing. This is a horrible, horrible thing that people fall into this. That, you know what, when they get sick, or God forbid their children get sick or something, what do they start doing? Guilty. It's a horrible, horrible thing. It's much worse than we think it is. Because could you imagine a parent's guilt walking around, their child is sick, and the parent feels the child got sick because of something that they did? Do you know what that can do to a family? It's horrible. It's a terrible, terrible feeling that people have. But what they've done is, they've misscrewed this whole idea of connecting spirituality with physicality. By believing that, you know what, God is punishing me and he's taking it out of my children. Or he's taking it out of my family. Or he's taking it out of my friends. Who can make this kind of a correlation? Who? But the Rabbi Shalom only knows his cheshbonis. All we can do is say, you know what, if something happens, let me look into my spiritual side. Let me see what I can do. I'm not saying it's because of lack that I got this illness, but it can hurt. It can hurt. So check a mezuzah, check the tefillin, be more careful in what we eat, be more careful how we speak to people. Are those bad things? No. They're not. So now, we get into this idea, once a person is sick, what's his rights of refusal? So now we have a person, we're going swinging back to the doctors. So now we have a person who is ill. We go back to the case of Hannah. Hannah doesn't want to have her operation. She's tired. Could anybody blame her? Is there anybody here in the room who you would be their per parent, you would say to her, Hannah, please, do it? So who, yeah? Some yes, some no? Some yes, some no? Right? Some yes, some would say, Hannah, you got to go for it. You're tired, you're sick, we know the chances are this, you got to go for it. Some would say yes. Her parents decided to leave it in her hands. Okay? So here we're going to go through a little bit of a discussion how Judaism and the secular courts may differ on this. May differ on this. Okay? So please, let's go to page 14. Okay? Liz Hayes. I'm not sure, let me just see. I don't know. They don't have it in the handouts, I don't think. Okay? But I'm just going to read on it. Liz Hayes, it says like this. What is it about the heart transplant you don't like? She's interviewing Hannah Jones. Not coming around from the anesthetics if something goes wrong in the theater and they can't do it. So it's the operation. The operation, yeah. If they had like 100% success rate every time, then perhaps I'd go for it. But it's not guaranteed, it's not a cure. So she came from the argument that, you know what, I'm going to go through all of this, right? And what's going to happen at the end? I'm going to suffer and die. So why should I do it for? They don't have 100% success rate. It's a risky operation, especially her heart was what? What did they say before? She had a hole in her heart
10%.
and 10% functional. 10% functional. I don't even know, it doesn't even say here whether her doctors were encouraging her to get this. They were just presenting the case to her. I don't think the doctor would encourage or not encourage. I don't know. Would tell her do it or don't do it. But they left it up to her. She said she's not doing it. The operation is just not worth it. Would that be a good argument within Judaism? If you said to a person, look, we need you to go through this operation, Dad. But Dad would say, it's risky. Is risky enough not to take this? We know the obligation to seek out medical help is very strong within Judaism, right? We know that you have to guard your life and you have to do everything possible to make sure that you live, right? But anytime you get into these worlds, we're not talking about taking a pill, we're not talking about, going and getting in a little scraping over here. We're talking about open up, take out the heart, put in another heart. It's like a shaft, right? You know what minor surgery is? The definition of minor surgery? Surgery done on somebody else, right? That's minor surgery. On me, an ingrown toenail is like a heart transplant. Okay? I need 8 physicians, nurses, the whole 9 yards. Forget it, because it's me. You go whatever you want. But for me, I need the world to take care of me. Right? So now, how do you know? So what if it's a brand new experiment? It hardly ever works. Look, it's our last shot. We don't know if it's going to work or not. Guy is tired, comes to the rabbi. He says, Rabbi, what should I do? And my doctor told me it's a very risky situation. Very risky. Meaning, not like 10% chance it's going to happen. Don't go through it. Don't go through it. 20%? No. 30? No. There's a magic number there. 50%. 50% somehow becomes a magic number in halacha. That if 50% or more of cases are successful, then that sets a criteria. That sets a criteria. Meaning that, again, I don't know statistics of heart transplants, but let's just argue for argument's sake here that more than 50% of all heart transplants work. Meaning that this is, and we have a sufficient study, by now we have plenty, it's already 40 years going on. We have sufficient studies to know that heart transplants work. They do. Kidney transplants work, lung transplants work, they work. Now, the scope of the class today is not about transplants, we'll deal with that next week, but they work. Then the argument of not going through with it is much less. Then the argument that the patient has, I don't want to go through with it, is much weaker. It's not that risky. So 50% seems to be the criteria that most rabbis will look at when they talk about a risky. If it's 10%, no, it's not worth it. If the guy is like, now, if the patient wants to, sure. What's the question? Of course, by all means. But if the patient doesn't want to, can we coerce him? I mean, literally coerce him. In the olden days, I guess they could coerce you. Today, I don't know what they could do. If you say no, no is no, and that's it. But the only thing that you could say is no, that your no is not halachically consistent. It's not consistent with halacha. So if you say, hey, you know what, look, I don't want to do anything, I'm finished, I'm tired, I don't want to go, you have a right to say that in America. I don't think they're could drag you into an operating room and actually rip your heart out. That's for your mother-in-law to do. But you know, could you scratch that, Paul, please? I don't know where that came from. Yeah, I don't know what that came from. But you know what? That's what I don't think they could force you. They can force you to have a transplant. But know that halacha would demand of you that you need to go through with this. You need to go through with this. So Hannah here, if she came to us, and we would be sitting as a group of rabbis, and Hannah would be sitting in front of us, and she would say to us, well, the doctor said that a heart transplant is the only way to do it, and we know that heart transplants work. What would we as a board of rabbis have to say to Hannah? Thank you. Do it. You have to do it, Hannah. From halachic, it doesn't matter. It's a risky thing, but you have to save your life. You got to go ahead with it. You have to go ahead with it. So from a halacha standpoint, if Hannah comes into a rabbi's office and explains the situation to him, then that's it. It works. It's risky, yes, 100% of the time. Does anything work 100% of the time? Anything, any doctor will tell you, any procedure, go in for the most common operation. I don't know what it is, easy operation. I don't want to mention, but whatever it is. Can any doctor guarantee that you're going to walk out of there? You never know, right? He opens up, could be complications. Could be a million different things go wrong, chas v'sholem. God forbid. So there's no guarantees. Everything is risky. You go under the knife, by nature, that's a risk. But we have to, that's why we're human beings, and we have rabbis that go through a shakavataya, back and forth, and that's it. So the difference really would be in secular courts. This Rabbi Breidowitz wrote this. Secular courts are primarily concerned with who gets to make a decision. That's all they care about. Who gets to make this decision? Courts and legislatures are thus preoccupied with advance directive, surrogate decision-making, ethics committees, IRBs. It is so because the primary value the law seeks to enshrine is the autonomy of the individual. That's what the secular courts are dealing with. Who gets to make this decision? So God forbid if you sign a directive that allows your daughter to make the decisions, your daughter gets to make the decisions. That's the way it goes. And if you do this, that's all they care about. Thus, once we identify the who, once we identify who's making the decision, we essentially have no interest in the what. We don't care what they decide. You want to go through it, good. You don't want to go through it, good. You will do. It's not our business. That we don't care about. All we care about is we want to know who's going to be the person on the bottom line. Is it the patient? It's not the patient, then who have they instructed to be? That's all the secular courts care about, whether you go through or not. Jewish law is far more concerned in the substance of the decision, should be, and Jewish law is far more interested in the substance of what the decision should be, and in theory the resolution should not depend on the identity, personal predilections of the decider. So a guy doesn't want to, he's afraid of the knife, so he doesn't want to go for an operation. That's not enough of a criteria to say, no, we're not allowing it. What? That's what we're more interested in. Secular law asks who decides, Jewish law asks what is to be decided. Why is that so?
Because there are many court cases where people have wanted tubes removed and the court says they can't and they can. And
no, he's saying the patient himself want the tubes removed or family members?
No, the patients and the courts don't permit it.
Who said? No, it's possible, but this is not the primary issue of the secular courts. He's not saying there's no cases that are that way. What he's just arguing is that courts generally are concerned with who makes the decision, not what the decision should be. That's all he's saying. Now there may be cases, of course. What?
I mean, there's a case right in the...
Right, the who, about her, right?
No, Perelmuter versus Satz.
Oh, you read Stent? Perelmuter.
Page 29, A. Perelmuter.
Versus?
Satz, which is the state attorney for Florida, where he wanted the tube removed and they argued against it. And it finally went to the court and they decided he could decide.
I could.
But it isn't who gets to decide, it's whether he can... Everyone agreed he was the one in charge, that he was competent.
Right.
The question is his
Decision is binding. This is binding. This is not only, I don't think he puts a blanket that only is, but I think the primary issue that the courts need to decide in these cases now, in the case, let's say, of a Hannah, let's go back to the case of the Hannah, is who gets to make that decision whether she goes through the operation or not. Once she decided not to go to the operation, there's no coercion of the court to say to her, hey, you know what, Hannah, this is not that far of a risky procedure, you need to go through it. The court's not going to say that to her. Would they say that to her, the courts? No. The courts will abide by her decision. If she came to a Bezdin, what would the Bezdin say to her? You need to go through it. You need to go through it. So I think that's where he's arguing basically over here. That in secular courts we're mostly caring about who makes the decisions of what happens. In Judaism, it's the decision itself versus the person itself. Should it be done according to halacha? I'll give both of you chances to promise. Is it according to halacha we should do it, or not according to halacha should we do it? Should we pull the tubes, should we pull the plug, not pull the plug? That's the issue at hand. Who's going to make the decision is secondary to us. But what the procedure should be is primary to us. Ryan, go ahead. I'm sorry, then Bob, right afterwards.
Yeah, I think that might be the majority situation, and I'm hardly a legal scholar,
right.
But there's certainly cases where the secular system will say, you may be a Jehovah's Witness, but your kid is going to get a transfusion.
Right.
We're going to take over. So it's not like saying the autonomy is the big issue.
But in those cases, it's different. Because in those cases, it's again the who. You see, in a Jehovah Witness case, it's not the decision to give the transfusion, it's we take over the decisions from the parents. That's what the courts are doing over there. I mean, the courts are saying that the parents are incompetent to make a good decision for their children. The issue is not whether the transfusion is good or not. They're arguing. It's interesting that you bring this up, and just because I met with a Jehovah Witness 2 weeks ago. I mean, it just happened to be that I sat down with them, and we were not arguing these issues of medicine, but they're in the courts almost to the T. The court is saying we're going to make the decision because you're not competent enough to make the decision. You see,
it's the doctor who goes to the court. It's the doctor who goes to the court.
Gets to make the decision. Right. Again, who makes the decision? That's the key issue here. Right? The issue is who makes the decision in the secular courts. If the court says the parents are not making a good decision, they take away the decision making from the parents.
But the point you're saying is they're not making a good decision.
Right. So therefore,
but if those Jehovah's Witnesses says, you know what? I'm a Jehovah's Witness.
No.
My kid's life is on the line. I'm going to give him the blood.
Yes.
And the court wouldn't get involved at all.
Of course, exactly. No, of course, there has to be a case. Don't get me wrong, there has to be a case. Yeah. If there's no case here, if there's no life or death there has to be, a situation. If there's no situation, then of course we're talking, it's all moot. There's nothing to talk about. But here again in the cases, who gets to make the decision whether the kid gets the transfusion or not? That's the court, that's what the judges are up against, freedom, all of the case. But I guess that would fit in. I don't think that would contradict what we were taking.
Autonomy of the person.
That's exactly what it is.
It's more halakhic what
right,
they're deciding.
Right, but really is only because the kid is a kid. Right? If the kid is no kid, forget it. No fusion, there's nothing you could do. There's not. The courts can't do anything. Bob, I'm sorry. Bob's been waiting patiently.
That was my point. She's a teenager. She's not an adult.
Right.
And, but the adults have taken her. They have decided to go along with her.
Right. Exactly.
They're telling us what the adults really want.
We didn't. It's not telling us at all because they've allowed her. This is the uniqueness of this case, that the courts have allowed her. The case is not over yet. I'm not going to let you leave until you know the end of what happened to Hannah. I mean, this is not over because this. But right now, as we're standing here, Hannah is making a decision, which leads us to the next question: is she old enough to make this decision? Is she old enough to make this decision? Now, you would say, who says yes? Well, what would Allah say? What would Allah say? How old? 12 or 13 years old, right? 12 or 13 years old, bar mitzvah. Can't they make this halachic decision? If we were strictly living in halachic times, right? When does emancipation happen? for a kid? 12 for a girl, 13 for a boy. Isn't that when we talk about becoming adults? Isn't that when we say to every bar and bat mitzvah today, you become a woman, you become a man? So at 13 years old, this kid says to his father, no, I don't want to. Right? Wouldn't we then have to abide by his decision? Halachically? We would, right? Halachically, No. I'm not talking about, forget about civil court. We're talking about now, we're in a Bezdin. Israel has now become a theocracy. Okay? It's not far from it. But Israel's now becoming a theocracy, right? So now we run only by the rules of the Torah. That's it, okay? Instead of the what do you call that group that sits in that big Knesset? Thank you. Instead of the Knesset, we have now a Sanhedrin, and as the Sanhedrin is now faced with this case. A 12-year-old, a 13-year-old boy comes and says, "No, I'm not. I don't want to take it." What do we say? Sanhedrin would have to say yes, right? We'd have to follow his. So Judaism is not that far off from here, right?
But Judaism isn't...
No. I'm just talking about from a Judaism's point of view. We would say a 13-year-old has a right to make a decision. The fact is that now, Dina de Malchus Dina, what you're arguing, Marvin, now is, okay, Judaism doesn't live in its fullest, it doesn't live in its pristine state. Judaism is not being run here. We don't run this country according to laws of Judaism. So therefore, Judaism says, Dina de Malchus Dina, the laws of the land is law. That means we live in the United States. So even though halachically I may drive at 65, maybe I find if I'm driving my donkey down the freeway, I may be going more than 55 miles an hour, but that could be good when you're driving from Caesarea to Akko. But here in the United States, when it says 55, my friend, you're not driving in biblical Israel, okay? You're driving here in the United States, so you have to follow the laws. So, of course, you have to follow the laws, but traditional Judaism, in its pristine state, would give a 12 and a 13-year-old. So we could not argue, a 12-year-old girl in the olden days could accept marriage. She could be married and have children and have a good day.
But you said that the Bezdin would say that even though you're 13, you're not allowed to make that decision.
But that would not only 13, would be 33 as well. Right, 33 as well. Right. I'm not arguing that the Bezdin wouldn't argue the decision. You see, again, they would argue not who makes the decision, they would argue the decision. Meaning if a 12-year-old kid would say, I'm not going through a transplant, Bezdin would say, too bad. But that would be true at 12, 14, 16, 28, or 48. If a person says, hey, I'm not going through it, but we have Rabbi, we're going to coerce you to go through it. The question is, could you coerce? That's a whole different story. Here you can coerce. Now, Judaism, this question comes up. Did someone want to answer? Bob, did you ask? You wanted to, okay. Andrea, you wanted to say something?
Well, would Halacha the law advise that this girl be counseled? Because maybe she's depressed from the lung illness, or maybe she...
Of course, Judaism would say, of course you have to get counseling and you have to listen to and go to a rabbi and listen to the rabbi and listen to a group of rabbis. Do whatever you have to do. No question about it. But ultimately, if we lived in times of the Torah, if the Torah was running, but not in the United States of America. Of course, in America, we know 18 years old, although the courts in England are also based upon common law. But here in America, of course, you're not an adult till you're 18 years old. You're still under your father's jurisdiction, etc., etc., etc. That's the way it is. But let's talk about, for a second, coercion. So now we have, Marvin had brought this up, it doesn't matter what a 12-year-old, if we've decided, if we've deemed as a Jewish court that this risky procedure is not risky enough to deny one's own well-being, what's the next logical step? What do? We take the guy, we put him on a gurney, on a bed, we slip him into the operating room, kicking and screaming, and say to him, too bad, right? Too bad, because look, you're going to let the guy die? He can't die. We have an obligation to live, right? We have an obligation to live. So therefore, we should have the obligation, if it's over 50%, 60%, and the doctors all say, a team of doctors, and all doctors say, look, this is the only way he's going to live, and it's a procedure, he has nothing to worry about, but this guy doesn't want it. I'm stubborn. I don't want it. Okay, so now you have, on one side we've just argued here for an hour about Judaism telling you have to live. We argued about autonomy, about the patient has a right to say no. Judaism is saying yes, he's saying no. Who's going to win here? Judaism or the patient? It's not as simple as you think. You think, well, the patient, because why? Because you're thinking American style. Don't think legal American style. Think Judaism style. Right? We're not worried about who makes the decision. We're worried about what the decision is. Right? So there could be a very valid argument for saying, look, the guy's not of sound mind. He doesn't know what he's doing. We want him around. Strap him down, boys. Okay? Can you? So let's read what Rabbi Yaakov Emden wrote. Page 16. 11a. Do I have that? In case of an illness or wound which is exposed, about which the physician has definite knowledge and clear recognition, and which has a proven and complete course of treatment, it is certain that we always impose the treatment on a patient who refuses if his life is in danger. Could you read that again, Rabbi? It is certain that we always impose the treatment. What do you mean? What did you say? Impose the treatment. In all such cases, we certainly perform the procedure upon him, and we even force him against his will because of the value of saving a life. We have a mitzvah of saving a life. Al tamid al dam reyecha. You can't stand on your neighbor's blood. If you walk by and see a woman drowning, are you allowed to save her? You're touching a woman. In halachic Judaism, you can't touch a woman. What? You can't touch a woman. Could you save her life? You could touch a woman. Oh, okay. So you have to. So sometimes the Talmud it says, yes, even though there's a prohibition about men and women touching each other if they're not husband and wife. Here, what do? You jump in and save her life, right? If you don't save her life because you're very religious, you're an idiot, right? That's what the Torah calls you. You're a chassid shaita, you're a fool, you're an idiot. So the same thing is here. The guy says, I don't want the operation, but we're going to save your life because it's ours. Go ahead.
Well, you talked about the evolution of the faith into modern times. And Daniel, the prophet, looked into the future and he saw that people would run to and fro and knowledge would be increased. So with the idea that knowledge is increased, as we can see in our day, it has increased.
Sure.
It no longer becomes just a matter of faith in the person of God, but in our opportunity to receive information through which to make good decisions.
It's also true.
Consistent with our hearts.
That's no one argues with that.
Connected with God, and so if a girl like that, she might have an opinion, but she may not have all the information.
That's true. That's true. So what we do, what does Rabbi Yaakov Emden say? We pay no attention to the fact that he doesn't want to suffer and prefers death to life. And we're even willing to amputate an entire limb if this is needed to spare him from death. It is incumbent on every individual because of the commandment to do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. So I think Rav Yaakov Emden is quite insistent upon that, hey, if the operation works, what do we do? Do it. What if the guy says no? Who cares? Autonomy is not that important within Judaism. The patient doesn't, if a guy says, look, I want to shoot myself, should we let him? No. So the same thing is here. If a guy says he wants to allow himself to die, sorry, we can't. But that's not the last word on it. That's not the last word on it. Reb Moshe Feinstein has a little of a different opinion. What is it? Does he bring down Reb Moshe here? Here, let's read the next text. I don't want everyone to go home thinking, oh my gosh, if I get sick, they're going to strap me down and take me to Haifa, and who knows what they're going to do to me over there. I don't want anyone to believe. Regarding a patient that refuses to take a treatment, if a patient's refusal is because he does not trust his physicians, then we must find him a physician that he trusts. If there's no physician because of the illness, there is no time to wait until he realizes that the treatment is needed for his well-being, or there is no time for him to be sent to a hospital and physicians in another city, then his physician must coerce the treatment, so long as the physicians of the hospital agree that this is indeed what will heal him. Okay? If the physicians get together and say, look, this guy is, we may give him the thing, but because he's so adamantly against it, it may not heal him, then obviously all bets are off. But if the physicians agree, the team of physicians agree, let's heal him, let's go. But this must be in a way that will not scare the patient. Okay? If he is scared, even if his fright is foolish, the doctor says to him, I'm telling you, you're going to be in and out of the operating room in no time. I'm telling you, it's easy. I've done this 1,000,000 times. How many killers does a good physician do in his life if he's a killer physician? Thousands, right? Thousands of killers. You know what a kill is? Does everybody, a hernia? You know what it said in front of his office, the physician? Your rupture is my rapture. Right? Okay, all right. Okay. Or in Yiddish they say, Yain killer is my gedilla. Right? Okay? So the doctor tells him it's nothing. It's in and out. You come in, you leave in a couple of hours, right? You don't have to worry. Even if his fright is foolish, the treatment should not be administered. And since the fright could harm him and may even kill him. and it would be if the physician murdered him directly. So be careful. Therefore, it is better not to coerce him, even if the relatives want the physician to force him. The doctors must act in good faith and carefully consider the case of an adult that refuses the treatment, since it is very likely that coercion will not bring about much benefits. If the treatment contains some risk, although physicians administer it to patients whose illness is of greater danger to them than the danger of the treatment, such a treatment cannot be coerced in any manner. You just can't. Rabbi says you cannot coerce a patient, even if the patient doesn't make any sense and it's foolish. So, based on the previous text, which prerequisites are necessary before coercing a patient to accept treatments? That it has to be not risky. Now, when coercing means encouraging. I mean, there's no coercion here. It's a moot fact because there's no way you could coerce. Could you? Is there any case here? I guess again, when you say with the blood transfusions, you could coerce, but not the patient. You could coerce the decision taken out of the parent's hands with the kid. But an adult, there's no way you could coerce anybody, right? I mean, even if it's a simple, easy procedure, the guy doesn't want to do it, it's over. Is there any way that we could coerce anybody here to have an operation here in America? No. Even if the treatment is not risky. All reasonable attempts have been made to alleviate the patient's fear of the treatment. It means you tell him and you encourage him and you show him how great life is. Fine. All the physicians have to be in agreement. That means if there's some physicians that say do it and some of the physicians say don't do it, what do? No coercion. And then certainly the coercion cannot result in the patient's worsening. That means, if you're going to coerce him and then it gets worse, no reason to coerce him. So, back to the beginning of coercion, according to Rabbi Yaakov Emden, yes. He says, God, we don't care. Put him on a strap him down and do it. As long as if we have a good chance of gaining good results, let's do it. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who's our contemporary, lived just a couple of decades ago, says no, you cannot coerce him to do this. Okay. Postscript. Back to Hannah. So at the beginning, we felt a little bit uncomfortable with her decision, because she needed a heart transplant and she wouldn't get the heart transplant and back and forth. So ultimately, she did it. She went ahead and she did it. She got the heart transplant. So if you turn to page 20, a terminally ill girl who refused life-saving heart surgery in 2007 and 2008 has returned to school after changing her mind and undergoing a transplant. Hannah Jones, 14, had the operation in London's Great Ormond Street Hospital in July. Hannah had various health complications after the transplant, but went back to St. Mary's High School in Lugwardine on Monday. Her mother, Kirsty, said she spent 10 days in an intensive care unit unconscious with her chest open because they couldn't close it up. She developed chest infections that twice turned into pneumonia and then caught swine flu. She added, "It's been a bit of a roller coaster." Oh, really? But that is nothing compared to what we experienced previously, Mrs. Jones said. Hannah said she found it difficult at first going back to school, but added that it was nice to get back to normal. "I changed my mind because the way I was going, I wasn't going to get much of a longer life and I wanted to see the world a bit and do more things. I think if I had said no again to the operation, I would have regretted it because I could not have been well enough to do those things," she added. Hannah said one of the greatest benefits of her new heart was that she could run around and chase her brothers and sisters. She said she was looking forward to going on 2 family holidays this year to celebrate her improved health. All right. So that was the end of Hannah. A happy ending to a very difficult case. Okay. So, to sum it up, we went through a lot of things this evening. Number 1, Judaism imposes an obligation for us to guard our lives by living safely and healthy. Now, don't think that this is such a blanket statement, because what does that actually mean? In all practicality, we don't know. That is such a broad and wide statement that it may not even have any practical applications to it. Can we eat red meat? Can we eat red meat? In Judaism, can you eat red meat? Well, if you can't, then 3/4 of the children in America are treif. Now, if you went to your doctor and said, "Should I eat red meat?" What would he say? Maybe not good for you, right? It's not that good for you. Can you smoke in Judaism? Yes. Yeah? You could smoke. Judaism doesn't outlaw smoking, but yet it says here, it imposes an obligation for us to guard our lives by living safely and healthily. Could you eat red meat 3 times a day in Judaism? Yes, if you wanted to, right? Is anything wrong? Is any prohibition? And you see, any rabbi would prohibit you from eating, chveisvos 3 times red meat every day? No, right? So that statement, even though in theory it's out there, but in practicality halacha has very few restrictions on diets, right? You can't kill yourself. Yeah. Okay, but can you weigh 400 pounds? That's about as close as killing yourself as you can get without actually killing yourself, right? Okay, so even though we have that out there, just for you to know that in practical terms, when it comes down to brass taxes, how do we interpret this into our daily lives? Yeah, of course, look both ways before you cross the street. I mean, that what Judaism would tell you, right? Because you have to leave safely and healthily. So just understand that there is an obligation, but in practical purposes, probably would be better if Judaism had outlawed smoking. Would have saved me a few bucks in my early days. You know, when you went to yeshiva and you walked in the first day in yeshiva and there was like you of smoke in the room. You know, everybody smoked there, including the rabbis. Everybody smoked. You know, back in the good old days. Okay? They never outlawed it. Maybe they should have outlawed it, right? But Judaism takes it. You can eat red meat, you can eat gribenis, you can eat kishka, you can eat whatever else. Not everybody could get to eat it. I'm saying most people get to eat it. And not everybody. There's some special people that unfortunately, they'll get their Olam Haba in Olam Haba. They'll get their Olam Haza in Olam Haba. Okay? So that's number one. There is an obligation for patients to seek medical intervention to cure illness. It's a chiddush. Right? When we say parents should go to medical doctors, this is not something that's natural within Judaism. This is something the Talmud itself had to come to some kind of a finding, on an exposition of a verse to allow us to go to physicians, not allow us an obligation to go to seek physicians. But biblically, what did we establish? Thank you very much. Anybody still awake here? Okay. The obligation to seek treatment in no way diminishes the role played by God in our lives. That is true. What's the problem there in that statement? Right? It doesn't always happen, right? Because we're now in America. This is a secular country. We put our faith in even though studies have shown us that those who take care of their spiritual well-being probably are better off spiritually. In every dimension of living, God gives us the opportunity to partner with Him in developing and perfecting the world we live in. An important part of healing is realizing that God is the one that cures the agency of nature and physicians. Through the agency of nature and physicians. Thus, prayer is an important part of healing. And I think we often talk about it. I know Dr. Frieden, we have discussed this a number of times, certain studies that have been shown, blind studies with heart patients. And I think we've talked about this before in Shul. And there was a certain amount of heart patients that were prayed for, and a certain amount of heart patients that were not prayed for. It was a blind study. No one knew who was being prayed for, and statistics showed that the people that were prayed for were healing faster, had a quicker rate of, so it's been showing through studies, so prayer is definitely within the spiritual world an important part of healing. The physical body and the spiritual soul are intertwined and depend on each other. That's an obvious to someone that believes that. You see, when we make up that kind of a blanket statement, you have to buy into that. Most people won't buy into that. Jehovah's Witness, for example, when I talked to him about the immortality of the soul, looked at me like I'm crazy. There's no immortality of the soul. Where does it say that in the Torah? Anybody can show me where in the Torah talks about the immortality of the soul, that the soul lives forever? This is something we've just picked up along the way, right? For them, the soul dies. All right? Torah is Zogin, but where do we pick up immortality of the soul? For this Jehovah's Witness, he said clearly the soul dies at death, and they wait for resurrection. It'll come back. There's no immortality anywhere in the Bible that talks about it. So when we talk about the physical body and the spiritual soul are intertwined, you have to believe that. You have to actually buy that. Not everybody here in America will accept that. I mean, not every physician even will accept that. You go to many physicians, and I remember I had a physician when I was a little kid. He was an avowed communist. He came from Russia. He was still a communist. And he told my mother, Mrs. Perelmuter, you're doing the biggest sin by allowing him to wear tzitzis in the summer. Tell him to take off his tzitzis. It's hot. What are you, crazy? What are you having him wear his tzitzis for in the summer? If I told him, no, the physical body and the spiritual soul are intertwined, he would look at me. Meshigan there. Take off the tzitzis. When the spirit is healthy, it aids in bringing about the physical cure. Okay, so that's why pishpas b'masav. Something goes wrong in our lives. What do? We also look at our spiritual well-being. Okay? If a patient is terminally ill and the chances for success are greater than the risks, the obligation to take treatment will apply even to risky treatments. Right? So if a guy comes to you and you're a rabbi, and he says, Rabbi, what should I do? I got to go through this risky operation, but is it worth it? Yes. And the chance is good? Yes. You got to go for it. I mean, later on we're going to go to the cutting edge. I mean, one of the classes, it's too broad. In principle, it is an obligation to do everything possible to save others from death, even to the point of forcing them to accept treatment. However, in many cases, compulsion may not be practiced or advised. So in theory, when Mashiach comes, what's going to happen? If a guy says, no, I don't want treatment, what are we going to do? Coerce him, right? Because why? Because when Mashiach comes, the world will recognize that God is the healer, and the guy is making a bad mistake by not taking this treatment. So the Sanhedrin may coerce him, according to Rav Yaakov Emden. But in Golus, when we live here in the United States of America, what did Rav Moshe say about compulsion? No, you can't coerce him. Why? Because the coercion is something that's going to worry him, and if it worries him, the treatment's not going to work. So why go through the whole thing? You scare the guy for no reason, right? So therefore, here the bottom line is, someone comes to you, you're the rabbi, they give you this case, she comes in, what would you say to Hannah? Bottom line is, Hannah comes in, she's looking to you for guidance. You say to her what? Should I go through operation or not? Yes. Could you coerce her? No. That's it. See, thank God you understood. We could have said that in 2 sentences, but I have to get paid by the word. So therefore you had to sit here for how long? Yeah. No one says a word. You sit over here like this. Okay, now, Paul, I think that brings us to the end of number 1.